Versa. Okay, let's put on the live.
Okay.
Okay, so we have a lot going on this week. Baruch Hashem. First of all, it's for me already it started the fast of the 17th of Tammuz. And as it's quoted in the Tanakh, and as this Rambam brings down that the Yomim Elu Yehavchu L'Simcha L'Moedim L'Simcha, these days will be transformed to happiness. And when we quote the pasuk quotes and says Tzom Haravi first. That the first he talks about that the prophet that the days of the fasts that we fast for the destruction of the temple are going to be turned into days of happiness. It starts with Tzom Haravi, the fourth fast. It means the fast of the fourth month. And when we count from Nisan, so Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz, the fast of the fourth month is the fast of Tammuz, which is today. So it's we're excited in anticipation for the transformation that's going to happen. Mamish, any minute that Mashiach is going to come and say, "Die legalus." And as this week's Parsha talks about, we're going to learn. We're going to get ready to go to inherit the land, to go into Eretz Yisrael in a way with Mashiach. So this week is Parshas Pinchas. So Pinchas is very much connected to you. Mazel tov for the name, and it's one of the last parshas that gets us ready for the Jewish people to go into Eretz Yisrael. It's kind of there's the final command of Moshe Rabbeinu gets the command from Hashem to avenge to avenge the Midyanim, those the people from Midyan that we learned about in last week's Parsha, the end of last week's Parsha, that they sent their daughters to go and corrupt the Jewish people. And with that came, in this week's Parsha, Hashem says that Tsaras HaMidyanim, they have to be taken, there has to be a punishment. And you have to go to battle against them because of what they caused, the corruption of the Jewish people. And we learned in our Gemara classes about the details of the story of what happened at the end of last week's Parsha, and how this was all done by design and planned by Bilham and Balak, and they were so focused on trying to corrupt the Jewish people that they sent the best. I mean, they sent their daughters, even princesses were sent to try to go and corrupt the Jewish people. And so Hashem said that this is the last thing that the Jewish people have to do before they go into the land. And we learn about it next week's parshas, when we learn about it, the Pinchas and the army of the Jewish people, a very sad army that we can learn about, that they go out there and they take soldiers from every single tribe, even I think according even the tribe of Levi, and they go and they take revenge from Midyan. It's an Akamas Hashem b'Midyan. And we know that the Jewish people were very sad by this last commandment that they had to do to avenge the sin of Midyan, because they knew that this was the last thing that they would do under Moshe. And after that, Moshe would pass away, as we learn about in this week's Parsha, where God tells Moshe that he's not going into the land and he has to pass on the torch, so to say, to Yehoshua, to Joshua, who ends up being like Yeshua, Koivish, Eretz Yisrael. He was the conqueror of Eretz Yisrael. Roisha Koivshim, the Gemara calls him, the head of all conquerors. And again, it's not a today that became a negative name. But for Yeshua, that was a name of pride. Roish L'chol HaKoivshim, he conquered the land to make it Machta Eretz Yisrael, to make it a land of holiness. A land, it went from being a land of the lowest of lands, meaning the morality of the people that lived in Eretz Yisrael until the Jewish people came, was mamish, it was on the Torah tells us over and over again about the sins of the Amoiri and the Canaanim, and turn it into a koivish, to conquer it for Hashem and for Kedusha, for holiness. So Yeshua, Rosh HaKoivshim, the head of all conquerors, is anointed in this week's Parsha. So Moshe is told he's not going to land. I mean, he's told already before, but last week's Parsha in Chukas, because of hitting the stone, but he's reminded clearly that he's not going to go into the land. He thought maybe that God lifted the decree or lifted the restriction, and he made it so, like we learn later, all the tefillos Moshe did, but the Jewish people knew that Midyan was the last thing they would do under the leadership of Moshe, in a big event, so to say. Obviously, there was the whole Dvarim that we learned about, and the things that Moshe got the Jewish people ready in Hazinu. But this last battle was what the Jewish people were waiting for, that after the battle, Moshe would pass away and they would go into the land. And they say that the Jewish people said to Moshe Rabbeinu that it says, as God says that it's an akama for the Jewish people. It's an akama for the Jewish people. It's a revenge for it's a vengeance for the Jewish people of the story of what happened to Kozvi Bastur of the princess and all the women of Midian, that they corrupted the Jewish people. And I mean, the Gemara says it's not just like, the Gemara says it was a well thought out plan of how they set up fake markets and they brought in special clothing that the Jewish people were waiting for 40 years. It says, the Gemara teaches us in Sanhedrin that the Jewish people being from Egypt for so long had this great affinity, a great desire for having linen clothing, because I guess the linen in Egypt was of high quality. And that also Mistrabi, being the climate of Egypt, Mistrabi linen was what was necessary. So the Jewish people had a memory. I mean, these people weren't really Egyptians; they were second generation, most of them. But it was something Mistrabi, a tradition that they had. That they remember the fish, and we remember the free cucumbers, and we remember the linen clothing. So they had this real desire for linen clothing, and the people from Midian knew that. So they set up these markets, and they were selling linen clothing, and they came, and then they trapped them in with as the Gemara explains, a whole entrapment of pricing and discount pricing and getting them in, and then giving them wine, and led to what it led to. And again, not that we're not taking responsibility for our actions, but Hashem didn't. Nevertheless, we know that that's the way, in general, how things work a little bit. And not that we know the ways of Hashem, but what we do know is that any association with a person that causes the next person to sin, even if it's not your fault, Hashem has, wants you to answer for that. Like we learned many times about David HaMelech, even David HaMelech, that when he didn't do anything, he was just being pursued by Saul. But nevertheless, when it came, Hashem says he has to answer for the story of Nov, even though he didn't do anything. Shaul and Doeg Hadomi went and destroyed the city of Nov because they gave shelter and weapons to David HaMelech. But nevertheless, God says he has to answer for that because you were involved. We know that when it comes to Lashon Hara, the Rambam writes about Lashon Hara, that evil talk is that, which is connected to the idea of Midian, as we're going to get to in a second, is that Lashon Hara, there's three people involved. There's the person who's talking, the person who's listening, and the person who you're talking about. So seemingly the person you're talking about, what does he or she have to do with it? I mean, they're a victim. They're totally a victim. But in the Torah, they say there's three people, there's three partners in Lashon Hara. There's the one who's speaking, the one who's listening, the one who the story is about, who they're talking about. Why? Because it's in some sort of way there's a connection. So to over here, at the end of the day, is the daughters of Midian. They were far, far from innocent. This was a planned idea to corrupt the Jewish people and to bring them to idol worship in the Pa'or. So God says this is a vengeance for the Jewish people. So Moshe Rabbeinu knew that if God would say to the Jews, that if Moshe would tell the Jewish people that the war of Midian is a vengeance for the Jewish people would say, we don't need a vengeance. Forget it. Never mind it. We'll wait. We're good. There's no rush, because they knew that after the war of Midian, the Jewish people, the Moshe Rabbeinu would pass away. So Moshe said, no, it's not a vengeance for the Jewish people. He says, in Kamas Hashem, it's a vengeance for God. So for God, then the Jewish people went and went to the battle. But that we'll learn a lot more about next week. In Parshas Pinchas, we learn starts off with the Torah telling us about the greatness of Pinchas. Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen. And the Torah is teaching us is an amazing thing. And the Rabbi speaks about this many times, and we spoke about it over the years, that in the Gemara in Sanhedrin, when it talks about the laws of a zealot, that is a zealot, and a zealot is a very, very dangerous law. It's a very dangerous law. Why? Because it leaves a lot of room for interpretation. And even worse, and even not worse, but even more complicated with the laws of a zealot that no one's going to tell you. There's no shear you're going to get, and someone's going to say, go out there and be a zealot. Halacha ve'emarinkein. It's a law, but no one's going to instruct you to do it. No one comes and says, go. If someone says, go be a zealot for God, that's not the law. It's halacha ve'emarinkein. It's a law, but no one's going to tell you to do it. You don't tell someone, you don't tell someone to be a zealot. A zealot has to come from real inner honesty. And like the Gemara says, you have to know that you're being a zealot for God, and it's coming from a place of total kedusha. And that's mihu zev ezehu. Who's a person today that could say that there's not even some sort of level of agenda, personal agenda of Yeshus. So Pinchas had to really, really look into himself and be able to know. And he stood there at the moment. It says, "Vein boichin." It says in the Gemara, the Torah tells us at the end of last week's Parsha that the people were standing there crying. They were crying that it seemed to them that Moshe Rabbeinu that things were losing control. Here we have Zimri ben Saloi, who was a Nasi, and like the Gemara teaches us in Sanhedrin. He wasn't. We don't know. We never hear of Zimri before this story. But the Gemara says you did hear of him. He had a different name. He was one of the princes that dedicated the tabernacle. In the beginning of Midbar, we learn about at the end of Nasa, we have a whole list of who represented each tribe. And when we open up the Chumash and we say who is the tribe of Shimon? So it tells us over here. We open up and it says the Bayom HaChamishi on the 5th day, Nasi v'nei Shimon. The prince of Shimon. That means he was the top prince, not just any prince. Like Nachshon and Aminadav was the prince for Yehuda. The top princes were the ones that dedicated the Mishkan 40 years before. So here's a person, for some reason, survived. Because the story of Minyan happened at the end of 40 years. Most people died by then. But Shimon this person was still alive. And what was his name? Shlumi El ben Tzuri Shaddai. And he has God's name all over himself. Shlumi Kel, Al Leflamed is El, Tzuri Shaddai. So he's a person that's been around for 40 years, a prince, and he goes, the Gemara tells us the details of what happened in the sin of Midian with Zimri, who was who's Shlumiel ben Tzuri Shaddai. It's horrifying. And the Jewish people are crying. They didn't know what to do. And Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen goes to Moshe Rabbeinu. And he says, the Gemara says a beautiful term. He says, my grandfather's brother. Why is his grandfather's brother? Because his grandfather was Aaron. And his brother was, and who's his grandfather's brother? Moshe Rabbeinu. So, how does he say it? He says, Achi Avi Abba, the brother of my father's father. Didn't you teach us that Kanoim Poigim by in such a situation a person's a zealot? Moshe Rabbeinu says, if you're the person who carried Igrasa, if you remember the law, you have to act on it. And Pinchas went, and the Gemara tells us the miracles that happened. But where did it come from? So the Torah tells us in this week's Parsha, Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen, it came from a place of love. Aaron HaKohen is the attribute of chesed, love, the Av Rabbi, the great love. And not just the great love personally that Aaron had. And the Kutei Torah teaches us that Aaron HaKohen is the shepherd of love. Moshe Rabbeinu is the shepherd of faith. Aaron is the shepherd of love. The Jewish people draw love from Aaron HaKohen. And you know the rule of thumb is that you can't give love if you don't love. Aaron HaKohen loves the Jewish people with such a passion. Oivis abris. He loves heavy Talmidish Aaron. We say in the beginning of Pirkei Avos that what defines Aaron HaKohen and what defines to be a student of Aaron. Oivis abris. You love every person, no matter who that person is. No matter what, even if the only compliment you could say about the person is that they're a bria, that they're a creation of God. There's nothing else. There's no quality that you could say the person has done nothing in their life that you could point and say that this is a worthwhile cause. But nevertheless, you're a creation of God. Oivis abris. He loved every person unconditionally. Mamish, like the spirit you have in Baruch Hashem. One of the most beautiful things I had when I lived in Seattle and I would come to daven in the Minyan of University District Minyan on 19th Avenue was that concept of oiv of Avos Yisrael, the unconditional love, especially the Mishpachas Dershowitz that the doctor and the Shimon have for the congregation in Mamish. It's a place of Aaron HaKohen, and here we have Aaron. So the Torah tells us that who's Pinchas? He's a grandson of Aaron. Because the Gemara says that the people of the tribe of Shimon and others, the troublemakers, always troublemakers, right? Always, you think troublemakers started in the year 2026. There was troublemakers from the beginning of time. There's troublemakers by Noach, and there's troublemakers by Adam, there's troublemakers by Avraham, right? What does it say by Sarah? Avram, imagine this. Avram and Sarah have no children for so many years. They finally have a child. I mean, you think that people would be happy in their simcha, right? They finally had a child. Sarah was even ready to bring someone else into her marriage, Hagar to have Yishmael. Who knows the tsaris we have till today for that, right? They say one of the there's a little paid on Sarah Imenu. Why did she bring Hagar into this? We're still mamish today. As I'm sitting here in Yerushalayim, we're sitting here suffering because of Yishmael. So Sarah went and she brought in Yishmael because she wanted that Avram at least should have a child. And what happens? That they finally have a child, and Sarah's 90, and Avram's 100 years old. And they make a party. And people said, people start saying, oh, who says it's Avram's child? Maybe it's Avimelech's child. And who says this and who says that? Sarah has to prove herself. She has to nurse all the babies. Henik banim Sarah, she had to, because they thought there's all kind of jokes, right? When jokers don't care, it's not about, people say this is the fact. It's not about the fact. The only fact about when someone says this is the fact is that you're being hateful. That's a fact. That you're being hateful and you're being negative. That's the only fact. Otherwise, you're just making up stories. So what were people saying? The fact is that Avimelech made Sarah pregnant. The fact is, okay, if it wasn't Avimelech, then they took a child from the street. They went to adoption or something. So there's all kind of stories. So she had to prove. And let's didn't start now. So what happened after Pinchas stands up and he stops the plague. The plague came in and there was mamash trying to hurt. 24,000 Jews died. And what did he start saying? Look at this guy. He's the grandson of Yisro, because Pinchas was also a grandson of Yisro, because Elazar married from Yisro's family. Like it has sometimes you have a family married each other. So Moshe Rabbeinu married Tzipporah. So Elazar married Moshe's sister-in-law, niece. So Moshe Rabbeinu, so Elazar also was part of Yisro's family. So therefore, Pinchas is a descendant of Yisro. He was also a descendant of the Gemara, and Sota says he was also a descendant of Yosef Tzaddik. That's where he had. That's why also a place of love. Yosef was a person of love. So here comes Pinchas. The Torah says you have to know that he was a zealot, but it came from love, and it came not just for love for Hashem, because you can't love Hashem if you don't have Ahavas Yisrael, you can't have Ahavas Hashem. The Rebbe, when the Rebbe became Rebbe, he made a proclamation. The Rebbe says when a person starts something, you have to make a mission statement. You have to make a statement. So the Rebbe says, what's my statement? What is my statement that the Rebbe has to say to the world? That there's three loves. Ahavas Hashem, Ahavas Torah, and Ahavas Yisrael, and they're all connected. Loving Torah, loving means Torah, the law, Torah mitzvahs, loving God, and loving your fellow Jew. And they're all connected and they can't be separate. You can't love God and not love another Jew. You can't love God and another Jew and not love Torah. And you can't love Torah and not love another Jew. Sometimes that statement's forgotten. When you realize it's three statements of love, but essentially it's one love. It's not even like a chain that you have three links that are linked together. At its shorish, at its root, it's one thing. And if you don't have Ahavas Hashem, or you don't have Ahavas Yisrael, or you don't have Ahavas HaTorah, then it's not that you have two loves out of three. You have nothing. Meaning to say, because it's all one thing, it's a sign of everything. So if Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen is acting out of love, it's not just a zealot for God. It comes from Ahavas Yisrael as well. And that's what the Torah is telling us. And that's how you know if you're a real zealot. A zealot is not a person who's hateful, who's angry, who's looking to say, I'm going to be a kanoi for God. That's just a nasty person. And is expressing it and using God as an excuse to be nasty. A zealot is a person who has absolute, unconditional Ahavas Yisrael, Ahavas Hashem, and Ahavas Torah. And that's what Pinchas was, and that's what Pinchas brought to the Jewish people. And that's why Pinchas is the Kohen Gadol. At the end, Pinchas becomes the high priest. We know that he's the high priest in the times of the judges. There's a famous story about Pinchas and Yiftach. Pinchas is Eliyahu Hanavi, right? Because what Eliyahu Hanavi? V'heishiv levav sabanim. What does Micha say in prophecy? That Pinchas is mamish connected to this week's Parsha, because when we're talking about, like we said, that the days of Shiva Asar Tammuz, the 17th of Tammuz, is going to be transformed from days of sad to days of joy, is because Mashiach is going to come. And who's going to announce the Mashiach? Pinchas. Pinchas is going to go out there and send out a message that he needs a bod. Mashiach is coming. So who's Pinchas? Pinchas is Eliyahu Hanavi. And Eliyahu was also, it says, Kanoi Kanisi. He also said, I'm a Kanoi, I'm a zealot for God. But it also came from Eretz Yisrael. Why? Because the whole mitzias, the whole identity of Elijah the prophet is the Heishiv Levavos Albanim, to bring back the Jewish people to Torah mitzvahs. And that comes from absolute love for the Jewish people. Like Elijah the prophet comes to every bris and he comes to every Passover meal. And he sits there for 3,000 plus years, watching the comings and goings of the Jewish people, and he's busy 24/7 helping Jewish people. The klal b'prat, in details and for the individual and for the klal, for the congregation. So we're getting ready for the days of Mashiach, and when it's Parshas Pinchas, and Pinchas is Eliyahu Navi coming to announce the Geula, and from a place of love, we have to get ready at this week's Parsha to know the certainty that we're getting mamish atat kum Mashiach. Any minute Mashiach is about to come, and this brings us to the rest of the Parsha. The rest of the Parsha deals with the laws of inheritance. We count all the Jewish people. And it says that all the negativity, all the negative that happened until now is gone. All the decrees and all the peoples that were involved in rebellions and spies and negative about Eretz Yisrael, all that's gone. What's left now is the people that are ready and desirable and have an anticipation to go into Eretz Yisrael. And where does that show itself? It shows itself in the Daras of Tzlafchad. The Daras of Tzlafchad is one of the most fascinating stories of the Torah, because the Daras of Tzlafchad, the Rebbe talks about that Tzlafchad, when did Tzlafchad die? So what's the story? Just to remind ourselves the story. That Tzlafchad has no sons, and Tzlafchad is from the tribe of Menashe. And Tzlafchad is a person that dies, but he doesn't die because he was part of any rebellion. The daughters come and say he wasn't part of any negative congregation of anti-Torah Eretz Yisrael or anti-Moshe. He wasn't part of Korach. He wasn't part of the spies. He had his own private sin. Different opinions of what his sin was. Some people say he was the Mekosh Sheitzim. He was the one who gathered wood on Shabbos, and even that was from Mesiras Nefesh. He did it to teach the people the laws of Shabbos. But they didn't try to justify what he did. They said, don't categorize him. Don't put him together with a group that he wasn't part of. He wasn't part of a rebellion. He wasn't part of negative. It means that he did a sin. We're not going to say he was a perfect person. But it doesn't mean that he has to be categorized with everyone else. He wasn't a rebellious person. He never had hate for the land. He wasn't part of the spies. On the contrary, he had obviously Yisrael. He wanted the Jewish people to know that they have to still keep Torah mitzvahs. So the Rebbe says, why did they wait so long? Why did they wait till 40 years? Why they could have come to Moshe Rabbeinu at the beginning? They say that the Gemara in Baba Basra tells us in the laws, the story of the Bnei Tzlafchad, that they say that they were chachamim, they were very smart, and they were very tznius, and they're very modest, and they knew when exactly was the right moment. When they saw that they were about to start inheriting the land, they came in then, and they had patience, and they came with derech eretz, respect. He came into B'fnei Kol Ha'eda, in front of everyone, in front of Elazar, in front of the Sanhedrin. And he said one thing to Moshe Rabbeinu, Tnu lana achuzah. Give us a portion of the land. We want to inherit the land. We also love Eretz Yisrael. It's not just that the men love Eretz Yisrael. And Rashi brings down that the women had a much stronger connection to Eretz Yisrael than the men did. Rashi teaches us at the end of, and he counted the Jewish people in Pinchas, Rashi says that the decree, it's an amazing Rashi, because it brings up some questions, that the decree on not entering the land were only against the men. The men had an issue with Eretz Yisrael. The men said, we want to go back. The men said, Zacharnu, remember the free fish, remember the free cucumbers, remember Chavshimi mitzvahs. The Or HaChaim HaKadosh was his yard site this week. We talk about the Or HaChaim, and we talk about the Kliyakar who talks on this week's Parsha, the idea of the Chiba, the tremendous love the woman had for Eretz Yisrael. And the Rebbe says it's not just Eretz Yisrael as a private idea, that the woman loved Eretz Yisrael. We see it till today, the woman loved Eretz Yisrael. But not just that the woman loved Eretz Yisrael, but they loved everything that Eretz Yisrael represented, including the mitzvah of tzedakah, including the mitzvah of giving, of chesed. He said that they're the daughters of Menashe. Why the daughters of Menashe ben Yosef? Because Yosef also was a giving person. And to show, the Torah says to testify that where did their love for Eretz Yisrael come from? It came from the additional mitzvahs that come with Eretz Yisrael. The men said, we don't want to go to Eretz Yisrael because, we have to give meiser, we have to give tithings. We don't want to give tithings. Right? What happened to Elimelech? Not to talk bad about people, but what happened when Elimelech left when he left Eretz Yisrael in the time of the famine? One of the Mefarshim say, why did he leave in the story of Shoftim, right? The story of Ruth and Naomi, right? So why does Naomi and Elimelech leave Eretz Yisrael, leave Beit Lechem? Because it was a famine. They didn't want to have to give tzedakah. They didn't want to have to support everyone. He was a wealthy person. He says, I'm going to go somewhere else. I'm going to Moab. No one's going to know. No one's going to know my address. I'm going to turn off my ringer. I'm going to turn off my phone. I'm not going to answer any emails, and that's it. No one could ask me for tzedakah. I'm going to go to Moab. Hashem didn't like that. On the contrary. And what does Naomi do? Naomi comes back to Eretz Yisrael. So it says the men didn't want to go to Eretz Yisrael, not to talk negative, but they didn't want to go to Eretz Yisrael because they say in Eretz Yisrael they have to give tithings, they have to give. We remember, as a dog, we remember the fish we ate for free. We didn't have chavshimi mitzvahs. We didn't have to do all these mitzvahs in Mitzrayim. There was no tithings and second tithings and truma and meisers, all these obligations. Every time I slaughter an animal, I have to give part of it to the Kohen. The woman said, no, we love Eretz Yisrael. Why do we love Eretz Yisrael? Because we love the mitzvahs. We love tzedakah. We love to give. And that's why it says that they were daughters of Yosef. And said, we don't want to just be in the land. We want to be part of the land. Give us a hold, a hand on the land. We want our portion of the land to build and to create. And this is where we're holding now in our life. The Baal Shem Tov said that in the time of the Jewish people, there's 42 travels of the Jewish people as a klal, as a people. And the 42 travels is through the desert of life, through the history of Golus. And just like we left Mitzrayim and it took us a while and it took us 40 years, it's taking us a while, but right now where we're holding is Al Yarden Yerechai. We're holding right on the other side, we're on the east side of the river. And therefore there's a chivas ha'aretz today. We see the tremendous chivas of Eretz Yisrael people have. We want to be part of the story. And when is this? Where does this conversation happen? And God says that they're right, and God teaches the laws of inheritance that the daughters have a part of the inheritance, and they get to Yarshin, and the Yarshin, the Gemara teaches us that they knew all the laws. They ended up with their father's portion, their grandfather's portion. They knew all the laws. They didn't come in unprepared. They didn't just say, "I want." They came in with books. They came in with Marmakaimis. They came in with showing this is the law. They were able to say this is the law. They showed Moshe Rabbeinu. They came into the base medrash and said, "Tnula nachuzah, we have a right." They knew all the laws. They knew all this. The Parsha says, "Chachamay sayu." They were mamish. They were tznuim, but they had the wisdom. They knew exactly how to deal with the situation. But what was the burning passion they had was Eretz Yisrael. And where does we learn this story in Parshas Pinchas? Because Pinchas is Elio. And we're holding our Yarden Yerechai. These are the last minutes before Mashiach. And we're getting ready for everything comes together in this week's Parsha. Moshe Rabbeinu is told, you have to anoint the next your student, Yehoshua, that's going to be able to start conquering the land. You have to prepare him. We're getting ready to go into Eretz Yisrael. And so we're standing now here in Parshas Pinchas, and we learn about the sacrifices, getting us ready. What do we learn about? We learn about the Tammuz sacrifice. We learn about everything. If you look about it, you think about it. Mamish, there's parts of all of our lives of a Yid is in this week's Parsha. Eretz Yisrael, Mashiach, Karbonos, Moshe Rabbeinu, Yehoshua. It's open. Avos Yisrael, Avos Hashem, Avos Torah, loving God, loving Torah, loving our fellow Jew. It's opening. All comes together. The Rashi quotes in today's Chumash in Thursday. Savas b'nei Yisrael, that God tells Moshe Rabbeinu, you want to take care of the Jewish people. Make sure the Jewish people are connected to me. Make sure they get up every morning to go to shul. What's the Tammuz sacrifice? The Tammuz sacrifice is the morning sacrifice. To get a person ready, you have to come Tammuz. Tammuz means consistency. Make sure the Jewish people wake up every morning for Minyan. Make sure they go to Shacharis, make sure they go to Mincha, make sure they go to Ma'ariv. The three tefillas are connected to the Tmidim. The morning sacrifice, the afternoon sacrifice, and the parts that were burnt in the evening, which is the Ma'ariv. So these are this. God says, He tells Moshe, you want to make sure that there's a continuance of the Jewish people. You're talking about setting leadership. You're talking about giving the Jewish people, making sure that they're taken care of, make sure they're also taken care of in a way of their connection to me. Tzavas b'nei Yisrael, connected. Tell the Jewish people they have to be connected. And what way they have to be connected is a level of consistency. Finish off an idea that the Alter Rebbe says. He says, why was the korban, the morning korban, the afternoon korban, a sheep? Why wasn't it an ox? A sheep is not a primary animal. What do I mean by primary animal? We have four animals that were on the chariot that Yecheskel saw in his vision called the Merkava, the chariot. The four animals. There was four parts. There was a man. There was the Nesher. The Nesher is the eagle, which is the king of the birds. There's the lion, the king of the beasts, and there was the ox, which is the king of the animal kingdom. So if the ox is the primary animal, why would we not have the Tamid sacrifice, which is every single day? That's the main sacrifice that's done every single day. Why would it not be an ox? Why is it a sheep? So the Alter Rebbe answers that yes, the ox is a very, very important animal. It's very strong, it has power, it has gvura, it's passionate, it's excited. But when it comes to consistency, there's another quality that we're looking for. We're looking for a person that's tamid, always. There's a lot of people that are out there that have a lot to say and they're full of fire, but they're not always so consistent. So there's a level, the Torah demands consistency. Every morning, this person shows up to the Minyan. Every afternoon, this person's there for Mincha. Every evening, this person's there for Ma'ariv. Tamid, always. And the person sometimes that idea sometimes seems to be overlooked. It's like a sheep that's overlooked. That's not a primary importance. God says no. Tzavas b'nei Yisrael. Make sure they come every morning to Minyan. So here again we have such a fundamental lesson in this week's Parsha of the need of consistency, the need of stability, the need of to be reliable when it comes to these things. And we have to integrate that in our avodas Hashem. So when we put all these things together, and we're standing here tonight, Shivasa Tammuz, which is like the pasuk says, this starting from Tomar Reviz Miyahavchu Yamim Tovim, it's a return to Simcha. So it has to be that mamish. There's no more excuses. There's no more excuses. It says in today's Chitas, it talks about also the sacrifice of Rosh Chodesh. And it says about the sacrifice of Rosh Chodesh that the Rosh Chodesh sacrifice is an atonement. An atonement different. There's an atonement. The Musaf sacrifice is an atonement for impurity. It's an atonement. So Rashi says it's an atonement for if you don't know of Tumah, if you don't know you were impure and you went into the Beis Hamikdash. But then Rashi quotes a medrash. And he says like this, read the medrash. The medrash says like this, which is a very important medrash, which just really kind of ties it all together. He says, Tzavas b'nei Yisrael. Sorry, let me just bring it up over here. Rashi quotes like this. It's wrong. Oh, it says on the pasuk that says Usir Izim, which was for a kapara. It says Madrash Agada. The Madrash Agada says like this: Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, Heviu kapara alai al shemaat yasayareach. I need atonement. It's an atonement for God. Why is it an atonement for God? What did God do that He needs atonement? Why did I make the moon small? Chodesh is the new moon. Why did I make the moon small? We know the Jewish people are compared to the moon. And when the moon is small, is when the Jewish people are not at our full glory. When was the Kari Sir Bashlam Musa? When was the full moon? The full moon is when Shlomo Melech was king. So then you don't notice so much that the moon is small. It comes Rosh Chodesh, the moon is small when you remember when you feel small like the moon, you barely, almost invisible, almost disappear. And God says that the Jewish people, even though that every time you're feeling on your lowest point in your life, that things are about to get better, you're about to grow into a full moon, and that's the positive that comes from the negative, the aliyah that comes after the yerida, the elevation that comes after the descent. But God says that still I need a kapara for that. I need forgiveness. I need an atonement for making a person go through that experience. It's not easy to become small. It's not easy to become small, and at that moment when you almost disappear, to have that faith and hold strong to know that you're about to start growing again. And God asked for kapara. I need a kapara. That I made the moon small. So I want to say that it's enough is enough. Die to Gullus. We're not looking to ask God for a kapara. We're not looking to give God a kapara. It's time to bring, like it says about Mashiach, that when Mashiach comes, the Rambam quotes this, is the moon is going to be shining again like the sun. And it's time for Klal Yisrael to shine again in our full glory with the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu. I wish everyone a meaningful fast, and everyone should be here to hack it together. Pinchas Eliyahu says Pinchas comes Lifnei Yom Ba. So he has to mamash announce it any second, because we have to wait whatever that time is between Pinchas announcing it and between Eliyahu announcing Mashiach and Mashiach coming. We shouldn't have to even wait that time. It should be keherifying with like a blink of an eye. And I wish everyone a good Shabbos, an easy fast, and a meaningful fast. And we see everyone together here in Yerushalayim, Mir Kodesh, B'Meir V'Yemeinu Mamash. Take care, everyone. Thank you for joining.
Take care.